So, the US Department of State has released an article titled The Need for Civilizational Allies in Europe. The entirety of the article seems to be largely spitballing at the European Union for not being properly dedicated to freedom, democracy, and the values of the West, right? The civilizational West, the Western civilizational heritage, their shared heritage is how they put it in the article. And the entire time I was reading this, seeing if this was worth covering on stream, uh, I I had a perpetual roll of the eyes every time, every paragraph. But the problem for me in this is not even that it has no decent points in here. There's not a single point in here that might be valid from an American perspective about how like free speech should work, for example. It's that every single principle that the senior advisor for the Bureau for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, Samuel Sampson, that's his job, is supposed to talk about democracy and human rights and labor. And his government is violating these principles every step of the way. And we'll go through it, and I'll talk about these examples of it. But Trump is one of the worst presidents for freedom of expression of the modern era. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And so some of these critiques I think are valid. I agree with some of these critiques, but coming out of the mouth of this State Department, they will never take it seriously. The close relationship between the United States and Europe transcends geographic proximity and transactional politics. It represents a unique bond forged in a common culture, faith, familial ties, mutual assistance in terms of strife, and above all, a shared Western civilizational heritage. Now, before we go forward into the critiques, mutual assistance in times of strife, as they continue to kick the can down the road, day one, before you're inaugurated, 100 days, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. If you don't agree to this 30-day ceasefire, if you don't agree to this unilateral ceasefire, I'll kick the can again. Mutual assistance in times of strife. Yeah. If this is a unique bond forged and this is good, what are we doing here? Anyway, our transatlantic partnership is underpinned by a rich Western tradition of law, natural law, virtue ethics, and national sovereignty. The tradition flows from Athens and Rome through medieval Christianity to English common law and ultimately into America's founding documents. The Declaration's revolutionary assertion that men are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights echoes the thoughts of Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, and other European heavyweights who recognize that all men possess natural rights that no government can arbitrate or deny. America remains indebted to Europe for this intellectual and cultural legacy. The connection between Europe and the United States is also the reason we speak honestly when we disagree or have concerns, and is why the Trump administration is sounding the alarm in Europe. When Vice President Vance addressed this year's Munich Security Conference, he made the reason clear, stating, what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with the United States of America. In the aftermath of two devastating world wars, European nations sought to prevent future catastrophes by creating supranational structures that would bind nations closer together and allow for more substantial diplomatic and economic engagement. Proponents of this new order, including well-meaning Christian and pro-democracy parties, sought a grand transformation, a world that would transcend the divisiveness of nationality and creed to usher in an era of unprecedented peace. By overcoming the anchors of nationhood, culture and tradition, global liberalism promises what Francis Fukuyama famously called the end of history, the ultimate innovation of political life. This is a very romanticized, I would almost say like fairy tale version of how it happened. Originally, when what is the European Union, but originally was just like an economic train zone was established. It was established between nations that had been brutalized during World War
Georgie
II.
underscore LaForgue has donated $50.
Oh,
I never have to wonder about your integrity, Dylan. You're my favorite and most trusted voice in support of Ukraine. Keep up the incredible work.
why, thank you. I appreciate that. That's a really heartfelt message. I appreciate that. Where were we? Oh yeah, the reason the what is the European Union, but what was an economic trade zone was established was in the aftermath of World War II. Uh, they were economically decimated, and European states wanted to work together to economically trade and work on each other's specializations so that they could prop themselves up and bring themselves up economically post World War II. That was the goal. And while Trump and a lot of other people in the Trump circle have talked about the European Union as established in order to, screw America, this is just, and I'm going to be blunt, oppositional politics. This is just, they're the enemy, demonize, demonize, demonize. There's no history to this. There's not a shred of truth to this. The United States endorsed the creation of the economic trade zone because we wanted people that were wealthy enough to buy our stuff. The reason why the 50s and the 60s and in the early 70s, going into the early 70s, that time period was so economically, considered a good time for the United States was because we were not destroyed by World War II. We were isolated by two oceans, right? Pearl Harbor did damage to one, there's Pearl Harbors, a few attempts by Japanese, some coastal raids, nothing of significant damage. And so we isolated ourselves from the effect of the war. Europe didn't. And so we had factories that were producing weapons of war that could now produce consumer goods that were then sold to who? If you're not wealthy enough to buy our stuff, then who are we selling these things to? How can we get money into the pockets of American car makers and to the employees on the line if there's nobody to buy the cars? I mean, you could, of course, just sell it domestically, but we're not a Juche model. And so we wanted Europe to be able to buy our stuff, and it would be a mutual beneficial relationship. That's part of the reason why we engaged in the plan of rebuilding and the investment of rebuilding. And it went from that towards more integration with time as the European Union, what would become the European Union, found more issues that they wanted to solve together, more integration, which also was underpinned, and this is the one piece I'll give him, by the philosophy of not only is this beneficial for us for economic integration, not only is this bringing generally like the quality standard of living up in Europe, but this also decreases the possibility of interstate conflict, where we can negotiate, we can vote as a continent, but we are not going to, engage in interstate war. So through integrating your economy with all of your neighbors to the point where if the Germans were to stop trading with all of Europeans, and who's going to buy their cars, all those car makers are going to go out of business, that motivates you not to invade France. I mean, there's a bunch of other reasons not to invade France, but that's a motivator. And so I still believe in that philosophy. It's part of the reason why the decoupling from China and the more we decouple from first term Trump to now has partially scared me. It scared me because the more you separate those economic tentacles, the less these disincentives will affect a prospective nation wanting to engage in warfare. Now, this is not a cure-all. Human beings are human beings, and if somebody cares more about their nationalistic revanchist fervor than they do about the economic health of their country and the potential response from the public, especially if they have a more authoritarian model that can suppress a public response, well then, congratulations. You live in Murmansk. But I do want to get back to this because I feel like I'm kind of belaboring my point. Today, this promise lies in tatters. What endures instead is an aggressive campaign against Western civilization itself. Across Europe, governments have weaponized political institutions against their own citizens and against our shared heritage. Far from strengthening democratic principles, Europe has devolved into a hotbed of digital censorship, mass migration, restrictions on religious freedom, and numerous other results on democratic self-governance. These concerning trends have only increased in recent years. In the United Kingdom, police are arresting Christians, such as Adam Smith Conover and Leva Tassi-Bolt, for silently praying outside of abortion clinics. In 2023, over 12,000 British citizens were arrested for online posts, including comments critical of Europe's migration crisis that authorities deemed to be grossly offensive. Okay, now, there has also been interest in the United States in legislation that would stop people from harassing people that go into abortion clinics. But I will say a silent prayer, if it is literally a silent prayer, could be considered a far cry. Of course, we're taking the State Department at their word from, harassing somebody as they're going into the clinic, yelling at them like baby killer, and trying to bring about them nothing but 10 tons of shame and guilt. And you know what? I don't agree with locking somebody up even for offensive posts about European migration. I'm sure that some of those posts might be stabbed, and I would feel maybe a little bit differently. But if those posts are just like what you would expect your racist uncle to put out at the Thanksgiving dinner when people told them no politics at the dinner table, well, then it's going to be a little different. I still think that's bad, but I do fundamentally believe in freedom of expression, and giving the government the power to engage with people's free speech in this way, I do think is bad. And I think that they don't deserve that power, because I have yet to see any government to have proven itself to be responsible with that power. Now, with all of that said, the Trump administration had Marco Rubio defend the deportation of students in this country because they wrote op-eds and engaged in protests against Israel, which is, last time I checked, not the United States. The Trump administration has been blocking scientists and other people, and I bring up the scientists because that was probably one of the weirdest examples. A scientist trying to go to Texas to go to an astronomy convention, blocked at the border due to the record of anti-Trump posts and commentary. I mean, we have a American government saying right now that when people come here to study and learn, if you're one of the foreign students, you can't really engage with challenging ideas. If you're born here, then yeah, you have all of the free speech protections. But if you're born overseas, no, you're not allowed to criticize Israel. You're not allowed to criticize their interests. Oh, and make sure you keep your critique down, maybe at home too. We want to broadcast our values as caring about this, oh, Aristotle, this and that. If we want the world to look at us like the free speech bastion that I was always proud of us largely being, of course, you can look at different instances during the Cold War and other times where that wasn't always completely upheld, but relative to most of the world, absolutely. And if we care about those principles and we're going to go and we're going to get on our high horse and go tell the Brits that their crumpets stink and their king's a cheater and the blah, 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 or whatever, we need to do it with actual moral leverage behind us. If we're going to be violating what we claim to be our principles by deporting these people for speech, I mean, don't we want the world, when these people go back to their homes and they're like, oh, you went to America. You went to America. Oh my goodness. What was it like in the land of the free and the home of the brave? Well, we weren't allowed to, express what we thought very much on Israel. We weren't allowed to express really what we thought very much on XYZ. And well, we weren't really allowed to take part in the protests because if we did, that could lead to us being suspended. But besides, all of that, it was really good. The people were nice. Oh, I guess America is just like, any other country when it comes, authority, they have their limits when it comes to free speech too. And their limit is to mean to Israel. So I just, again, it's not that like I wouldn't agree and be like, you know, your free speech laws are overbearing. But when you're saying that while making the places the hotbeds of learning where our youth are supposed to challenge themselves and experience these values firsthand or having them undermined, I just don't take it seriously. In Germany, the government has established elaborate systems to monitor and censor online speech under the guise of combating dissident. By the way, the Trump administration is 100% monitoring the social media behavior of people. Absolutely monitoring the social media behavior of people. Monitor and censor online and they're going to be monitoring the social media behavior of immigrants and of students on student visas to determine whether or not they stay here. So again, oh, you can't. Oh, the monitor and censor of speech. Hey, did you post "fuck Israel" on Twitter? Deported. Online speech under the guise of combating disinformation and preventing offense. When German citizens express legitimate concerns about the economic and social impacts of globalization or criticize politicians, they risk being fired, labeled as radicals, or even having their homes raided by law enforcement. The European Union's Digital Services Act, built to protect, by the way, like most of the time, it isn't just, I don't like the EU very much, right? It's going to be things like those goddamn, you keep fucking saying their stupid language in the, God, it's going to be stuff like that, right? Now, I'm not even saying that people being racist should be something like, oh, the government, your racism banned, racism made illegal. No one, like, how would you legislate that? Really? How do you enforce? How are the prisons wide enough? That's my first question. Is the prisons even wide enough? But again, I don't know how I'm supposed to take these critiques from this government. For example, censorship. Censoring of online speech is so terrible. Don't censor speech. Okay. Why is it that the broadcasters that make critical coverage of the president are having their broadcast license threatened? When I said every paragraph, I rolled my eyes. These are the things that were going through my head. If you're going to make these critiques across the Atlantic Ocean, the entirety of the continent's going to fucking scoff at you because they see what's going on at home. The European Union's Digital Services Act, built to protect children from harmful online content, is instead used to silence dissident voices through Orwellian content moderation. Independent regulators now police social media companies, including prominent American platforms like X, and threaten immense fines for non-compliance with their strict speech regulations. This environment also restricts Europe's elections, as recently highlighted by Secretary Rubio. The popular Alternative for Deutschland party was just labeled an extremist organization by German intelligence, which could lead to the party's exclusion from the electoral process. Leading French presidential candidate Marine Le Pen was charged with embezzlement and, departing from standard procedure, immediately banned from running. Restrictions have likewise occurred in Poland and Romania against select political parties or politicians. Simultaneously, Christian nations like Hungary are unjustly labeled as authoritarian and human rights abusers. This is the thing that drives me wild. If I was to say something like, hey, in Romania, maybe they should have just ran it through with Călin Georgescu in the first round anyway. Maybe that, in fact, maybe doing it the way they did probably just boosted up the replacement candidate more and made it a closer race than it needed to be, and X, Y, Z. Maybe I go out there and that's my take, okay? And I come in here and I defend that position from a principled stance that I, of course, still don't want Călin Georgescu to win. But if I'm going to go entertain any of these examples, whether it has to do with the case of Marine Le Pen and the misuse of party funds and embezzlement, which is a crime, by the way. You know, I understand Trump being charged with crimes as a political candidate because you just don't know how to stop being a criminal. It's very difficult for him to process, very difficult for him to go through his mind. But when you end this shit, like if he would have just cut off that last sentence, this would at least be like something you could like talk about. But Viktor Orban is currently trying to gut organizations that get any funding from outside of Hungary. So outside of the influence or finance of his oligarchic institutions within the country. If you're, for example, getting 10% or 20% or 30% of your funding from a human rights organization that wants to help with your food bank, well, tough shit. If you are a media organization that's getting 10%, tough shit. You want to talk about freedom. You want to talk about, oh shit, I love it when these organizations can go and operate freely. Oh, you got money from some of these human rights groups, which looks at the amount of corruption in Hungary, which is the highest in Europe, and looks at the media environment and the media restrictions put in place, and the empowerment of the state press to be the propaganda arm of the Orban government. Like, you go through all this. I go through any of Viktor Orban's terrible record when it comes to his authoritarian treatment of the media. Any of this, they don't give a fuck. They like Orban because Orban's an ally with Trump, and Trump likes Orban. It's as simple as that. Because Trump likes Orban and Orban likes Trump, and they consider each other political allies, none of his authoritarian tendencies matter. Viktor Orban is more authoritarian than every single other country mentioned and their leadership. Point blank, period. Even with me conceding that many of them still wouldn't abide by my standards of what I would want in a liberal society. But he is way and a far worse. And at the end, you just go out of your way to throw him a bone for no fucking reason. Again, you're the drain the swamp guy, and you're championing literally the most corrupt government in the European Union. The most corrupt government in the European Union that also sucks the most money out of the European Union through them funneling it into it because of its state of poverty. So you know what that is? A corrupt social welfare state. Trump's favorite. Simultaneous. Oh, I already read that. Americans are familiar with these tactics. Indeed, a similar strategy of censorship, demonization, and bureaucratic weaponization was utilized against President Trump and his supporters. See, this is the State Department. This is the State Department, and they're just making this the propaganda arm of the president. We're just going out of nowhere. Oh, they bureaucratic weaponization. Trump committed crimes, and he was then having to pay for those crimes. He illegally stored those documents. He was showing classified documents to the press that he didn't have the rights to show to the press. He was hiding it from the National Archives when they tried to retrieve it, leading to the raiding of Mar-a-Lago, because he was hiding those documents from them, and they had no clue what he was going to do with them. And it was only after a year of trying to retrieve them that they finally raided him. And that's just one of the crimes. That's not bureaucratic weaponization. That is, you committed a crime, you do the time, and he still didn't do any time, and he's still whining about it. My goodness. And censorship. My God, President Trump doesn't shut up. How is it censorship? What this reveals is that the global liberal project is not enabling the flourishing of democracy. Rather, it is trampling democracy and Western heritage along with it, in the name of decadent governing class afraid of its own people. Of a decadent governing class afraid of its own people. I have never known the State Department to talk like this. Talk like a podcaster. Our concerns are not partisan, but principled. The suppression of speech, facilitation of mass migration, targeting of religious expression, and undermining of electoral choice threatens the very foundation of our transatlantic partnership. But, by the way, if we lose an election, fuck you. We didn't lose. We get to stay in power, and we will leverage violence in order to stay in power, which is what Trump did on January 6th. That's why he sat on his ass on the couch and watched it on TV for hours, sipping his Diet Coke as people desperately tried to reach him while Rudy Giuliani called people on the Hill. Do we trust that in 2026 or 2028, that if the results don't go Trump way, that he's just going to accept it? Secretary Rubio has made clear that the State Department will always act in America's national interests. Europe's democratic blacksiding not only impacts European citizens, but increasingly affects American security and economic ties, along with the free speech rights of American citizens and companies. Our hope is that both Europe and the United States can recommit to our Western heritage, and European nations will end the weaponization of government against those seeking to defend it. But you guys don't even want to physically defend it when it comes to what's going on in Ukraine. Whatever. I don't want to derail. We will not always agree on scope and tactics, but tangible actions by European governments to guarantee protection for political and religious speech, secure borders, and fair elections would serve as a welcome step forward. The United States remains committed to a strong partnership with Europe and working together on shared foreign policy goals. However, this partnership must be founded upon our shared heritage rather than globalist conformity. Our relationship is too important, our history too valuable, and the international stakes too high to allow this partnership to be undermined. Therefore, on both sides of the Atlantic, we must preserve the goods of our common culture, ensuring that Western civilization remains a source of virtue, freedom, and human flourishing for generations to come. My goodness. What are the comments like? I'm so curious. Europe as a whole has been invaded by people that have nothing in common with the Western world. Wow, the first one's about immigrants. Who would have thought? Well, no, not immigrants. Invaders. Invaders. They've invaded. They've invaded with their rucksack over their shoulder while scurrying under the border. And that's a long thread of just debating immigrants, debating immigration. My God, this is long. It's all just one big debate. Rich hypocrisy coming from the very department which canceled the student visa of students for writing an opinion in a student newspaper, not to mention the detention of a permanent resident, Mahmoud Khalil. Okay, so last statement. Sorry, Dana Bo, for making it so you're going to have to edit this little pause out. It's not that there isn't like maybe 1/5 of this article that might have something in there of valid critique of Europe when it comes to at least a Yankee perspective on what a government should and should not police when it comes to a person's expression or to the specifics of how an election should be run. But if there was anyone else in the world making that 1/5 of the argument, it would probably be taken more seriously than a State Department and, more importantly, an entire government bureaucracy that I don't think cares about these values to the bone because the person at the head doesn't care about it. It's not that any individual civic servant doesn't. Many of them do. But now that the head of the snake doesn't, that goes down to the tail. Do a special hippy dippy with just the comment section there? Actually.